By the late 1950s, four countries have nuclear weapons: the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and France. China watches all of them, and after years of feeling threatened and pressured by outside powers, decides it will never again be vulnerable to nuclear blackmail. This episode is the story of how the People's Republic of China went from a war-torn, newly formed state to detonating its own atomic bomb in the deserts of Xinjiang, and why Chairman Mao Zedong believed nuclear weapons were the only real guarantee of national survival. We'll see how the Korean War and repeated American nuclear threats shaped Mao's thinking, how the Soviet Union initially helped China's program before pulling out, and how Chinese scientists finished the job alone at a secret desert site called Lop Nur. By the end, you'll see how China's bomb reshaped Asian security, deepened the split between Beijing and Moscow, and gave China a permanent seat among the world's most powerful nations. To understand why China wanted the bomb, you have to go back to the Chinese Civil War and the founding of the People's Republic in 1949. The new communist government, led by Mao Zedong, inherits a country exhausted by decades of invasion, occupation, and internal conflict. Almost immediately, the new state faces international isolation. Most Western countries refuse to recognize the communist government, and China's relationship with the United States, already tense, turns openly hostile within a year. That hostility becomes a direct military confrontation during the Korean War. Chinese troops fight American-led forces on the Korean peninsula, and at several points, American officials publicly discuss the possibility of using nuclear weapons against China. For Mao and Chinese leaders, this is a formative and frightening experience. China has no nuclear weapons of its own, and it is being directly threatened by a country that does. The lesson they draw is blunt. Never again should China be nuclear vulnerable while facing a nuclear-armed adversary. China turns to its main ally at the time, the Soviet Union, for help. In the mid-1950s, Moscow agrees to assist China's nuclear program, providing technical training, some equipment, and expertise in exchange for China's continued alignment with the socialist bloc. Soviet advisors helped China establish early nuclear research institutes, train Chinese scientists, and even agree to provide some technical documentation on bomb design. For a few years, it looks like China's path to the bomb will closely resemble the Soviet Union's own path a decade earlier, significant outside help accelerating a national program. China establishes its own version of an atomic energy authority and begins building infrastructure, research reactors, uranium processing facilities, and eventually a dedicated design and testing organization. Scientists who trained abroad, some in the Soviet Union and some earlier in Western countries, return home to lead these efforts. One of the most important figures in this effort is physicist Qian Sanqiang, who helps organize China's early nuclear research programs. Alongside him, other returning scientists bring expertise in physics, chemistry, and engineering gained from studying overseas before the revolution. But the Sino-Soviet relationship is not as stable as it looks. Ideological disagreements between Mao and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev grow sharper through the late 1950s, touching on everything from communist doctrine to how aggressively to confront the West. In 1959 and 1960, this tension reaches a breaking point. The Soviet Union, worried about supporting a Chinese nuclear program it can no longer fully trust or control, abruptly withdraws its advisors, cancels technical agreements, and stops sharing further nuclear assistance. This withdrawal is a serious blow. China loses access to updated technical information, spare parts, and the direct expertise of Soviet specialists, right in the middle of building a program many analysts thought depended heavily on outside help. Mao's response is defiant rather than discouraged. He insists that China will complete its nuclear program entirely on its own, treating the Soviet withdrawal as proof that China can never again depend on any foreign power, even a supposed ally, for something as important as national security. This period coincides with severe internal challenges. China is in the middle of the Great Leap Forward, an economic campaign that leads to widespread famine and hardship across the country. Building a nuclear weapon during this crisis requires enormous political will and sacrifice. Despite the famine and economic strain, the government protects and prioritizes the nuclear program, redirecting scarce resources, skilled personnel, and funding toward it, because leaders view it as essential to China's long-term survival and international standing. Chinese scientists and engineers, now working without direct Soviet guidance, have to rebuild critical knowledge largely from scratch. They rely on notes taken during the years of cooperation, published international physics research, and their own theoretical calculations. The program's physical center of gravity shifts to remote facilities in western China. A dedicated design academy works on weapon physics, while a vast complex in the Gobi Desert region near Lop Nur in Xinjiang is developed as the testing ground. Production facilities for enriching uranium and reprocessing plutonium are built in remote provinces, often in mountainous or desert terrain, chosen specifically for secrecy and isolation. Entire new towns rise around these sites to house workers, engineers, and their families. Progress is slow and difficult without foreign assistance, but Chinese engineers make steady advances through the early 1960s, solving problems in uranium enrichment, weapon physics, and precision engineering largely through trial, error, and persistence. By 1964, Chinese scientists believe they have a workable design and sufficient fissile material for a test. The pressure to succeed is enormous, both because of the resources already invested and because of the symbolic importance Mao has placed on this achievement. On October 16, 1964, China detonates its first nuclear device at the Lop Nur test site in Xinjiang. The device, based on a uranium-235 implosion design, produces a bright flash and a rising mushroom cloud over the remote desert landscape. With this test, China becomes the fifth country to possess nuclear weapons, joining the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and France. Chinese state media announces the achievement with pride, framing it as proof that China can no longer be threatened or bullied by nuclear-armed powers. The international reaction is significant. Western intelligence agencies are surprised by how quickly China achieved this milestone, especially after losing Soviet support. The test also deepens the ideological and strategic split between Beijing and Moscow, since it shows China no longer needs Soviet help to be a nuclear power. China continues to develop its nuclear capabilities rapidly after this first test. Within a few years, Chinese scientists also successfully test a hydrogen bomb, achieving thermonuclear capability faster than most Western analysts had predicted. Strategically, China's bomb transforms the security landscape across Asia. Neighboring countries, including India, take note of China's new capability, which eventually factors into their own decisions about pursuing nuclear weapons in the following decades. Domestically, the successful test becomes a powerful symbol for the Chinese government, reinforcing the narrative that China has overcome foreign domination and can now defend itself as an equal among world powers, regardless of internal hardships during the same period. Diplomatically, China's nuclear status eventually contributes to its rising international influence, including its later admission to the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member, a position that reflects its status as a recognized major power. Unlike some other nuclear states, China's official doctrine long emphasizes a relatively small, survivable arsenal focused on deterrence rather than matching the huge stockpiles built by the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Over the following decades, China continues to modernize its nuclear forces, developing more advanced missiles, submarines, and command systems, while still publicly maintaining that these weapons exist purely for defensive deterrence, not offensive use. So how did China get the bomb? It endured war, isolation, and direct nuclear threats during the Korean War, received early help from the Soviet Union, lost that help amid the Sino-Soviet split, and then finished the job alone through the Great Leap Forward and beyond, testing successfully at Lop Nur in 1964. The result was a nuclear-armed China that could no longer be threatened without consequence, a permanently altered Sino-Soviet relationship, and a new major power whose influence over Asian and global security questions would only grow in the decades that followed. In our next episode, we head to a country that has never officially admitted having nuclear weapons at all: Israel. How did a small nation, surrounded by hostile neighbors from its founding, develop what analysts believe is a substantial nuclear arsenal, while maintaining total public silence about it?